Despite a good start to 2011, when INEOS Chairman and CEO Jim Ratcliffe last spoke to Inch in November, the uncertainty in Europe had led to a considerable softening in demand. In March, Jim once again spoke to INEOS Group Director Tom Crotty, who began by asking Jim if the year had ended as he'd expected.
Yes, it was a quiet quarter four. Because of the euro crisis, because of the Chinese tightening their belt. And it was pretty much across the board. All the businesses, I think, found it a little bit difficult. The orders dried up. I think there was a lot of destocking going on around the world. It wasn't a disaster. It was similar to the previous year, 2010, which was also quite quiet, and 2009 was quite quiet. So I don't think we found, it was a disappointment compared to the first half, which was outstanding. But, the chemicals business does go up and down, we all know that. And, over the course of the 4 quarters in 2011, it all balanced out to be a very comfortable year for us. And quarter one this year started strongly as people are restocking, and I think generally demand has picked up. America's going well, China's sort of loosened the belt again.
And how's the safety performance for the year?
Well, there are different aspects to safety, of course. There's personal safety, process safety, what have you. But on the personal safety front, it was a record year. Our statistic, I think, was 0.2 or 0.21 was the best we've seen. But I think, that in itself was very, very good, obviously, and we were very pleased with that. But I think, more importantly, we've now seen 4 years of progress. It's got better each year now for 4 years, which I think shows that the systems that we put in place are obviously working quite well. And I think we would say now that we're probably in the top decile of the chemical industry, and the chemical industry itself is very good on safety. Pretty much, we can always get better. We know Exxon are probably at about 0.16, we're at 0.21, so there's still progress to be made, and always will be, I suppose, until we get it down to 0, which is probably impossible, but we're always heading that direction. The other aspect, of course, is process safety. We scrutinise very carefully losses of containment, and any losses of containment over a sort of trivial amount we always talk about in the board meetings, as you know. And we've more recently on process safety, it's more difficult to measure process safety, of course, than personal safety, because statistically there's not as much happening. But now we look very carefully at these critical trips and alarms. So if we ever get to the last line of defence, and there's an issue with one of the chemical processes, and one of the last lines of defence, which is either a person or a system, has to do something to prevent a major problem, then if we ever get to that last line of defence, we always talk about that at the board meetings, and that's been extremely helpful for us as well, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In January, you went to the financial markets to refinance the borrowing. What was the response from the potential investors?
Well, surprisingly good, I must say. We were heavily oversubscribed. January was still quite a difficult month, because, of course, we were still coming out of this euro crisis, and people weren't too sure, because the Chinese had not come back from their New Year celebration, so we weren't too sure whether the Chinese were going to, carry on marching on, as it were. We had seen some very positive signs coming out of America, but nevertheless, we were still a little bit uncertain as to how well we would be received in the marketplace, and we were delighted really at the response. It was oversubscribed by an enormous amount. I think we were raising just less than $1 billion, and we certainly were sort of well over $5 billion of appetite, and I think in the end we sort of took out $1.6 billion. And of course, we want to follow that with the completion of the process and complete the refinancing, which is one of the major exercises we've got left for the rest of this year.
And why do you think demand for INEOS was so high? Well,
apart from the fact they liked us, obviously, and the presentations obviously went down quite well. I think INEOS is seen, it's made a lot of issuances over the years. It's never let anybody down. We were severely tested in the crisis in 2008. And we obviously passed that test, in the worst recession for 30 or 40 years. And I think the investors, they've done very little investing over the last 2 or 3 years since the crisis. So they now sit on quite a lot of cash. And, they're looking for ways of investing, because obviously if you leave your cash on deposit, it earns nothing. The bonds that we issue are paying 8%. That's a lot more than nothing. And they see INEOS as being a good risk. It's been an issuer over many, many years now. It's always issued well. The bonds have always performed well. I mean, they go up and down. Obviously, if you have a crisis, the bonds dip down, but they've always come back. We've never defaulted. And they quite like the story. INEOS performance, apart from Q4, was extremely strong in 2011. First half of 2011 was the strongest we'd ever seen it. So we've obviously bounced back from the recession well. And our vision of 2012 is quite positive, and that came through as well, I think. So all in all, it was a very, very good result. We were delighted.
So did the very positive response come as a surprise? Pleasantly
surprised, yes. Yeah, I think we thought it would go quite well. Otherwise we wouldn't have gone out there in the first place. But the Americans have got this awful excuse all the Americans who are listening, they have this awful expression, a blowout deal, which, it doesn't really sit that well in the English language, but it was a blowout deal. It went extremely well. And of course, most of the funds we raised was in the United States, where that market is very strong, and is people are thinking very positively in America now.
And what does that mean now for the business going forward?
Well, I think, we have to finish the refinancing. It's a thing you do in bite-sized pieces, because it's too large to do all in one go. So we're hopeful that we'll sort of be out there again in the first half of this year and complete the process. And I think it just means we have a very settled balance sheet. But this is still part of the process of addressing the issues that arose in 2008 and 2009, and we have to complete that process because, as I'm sure people will remember, we finished up with some fairly severe penalties, effectively, from the financial markets because of what happened in the 2008-2009 crisis, which was caused by the banks, but nevertheless the banks obviously have got the powers to inflict sort of quite hefty penalties on INEOS, and we have to take ourselves away from that. And through the refinancing, all those penalties disappear.
Do you see any changes to the INEOS business model of a privately owned chemical company?
No, I don't think so. I think it's steady as she goes, really.
And are the joint ventures that we set up last year doing well?
Styrolution had a very quiet Q4, although it had a good year throughout the full year. It had a good year, but Q1 it's been extremely strong for Styrolution. So they've started the year all guns blazing. Refining. The refining market in Europe is still not settled down following the crisis, 2008, 2009. We still need to see more capacity coming out. And some capacity is obviously going to come out because Petroplus obviously collapsed a few months ago, although people are still toying with the idea of trying to rescue some of those components, which to us looks ridiculous. But it's a very difficult business to predict. Refining had quite a good January, but then February's been quite difficult. So, we need more time really in refining for it to settle down, for the supply and demand side to balance out.
So what's your focus for the business this year?
Number one, without question, is to complete the refinancing, which hopefully will go well. And then I think our focus is largely on two areas of growth for INEOS. One, we've got shale gas in America, which is throwing up a lot of opportunities, and there's quite a lot of our time, attention and focus thinking about whether we wish to take advantage of any of those opportunities. And then the second growth story really in INEOS is China, where there's a lot of interest being shown in INEOS's intermediates businesses. China have invested in the upstream, sort of what we describe as O&P businesses. So lots of crackers and polymer plants have been built in China and still are being built in China, but they haven't really moved into that intermediates area, which is is one step downstream of the the upstream petrochemicals. And INEOS, of course, has some very interesting businesses in phenol and acrylonitrile, oligomers, oxide, some of our technologies businesses. So there's quite a lot of interest in China, and some of those areas. So I think that largely is the focus of 2012.
Now, in November, you said there are always going to be ups and downs in business. How does a company like INEOS cope with that sort of uncertainty?
Well, there are no sort of easy recipes, I suppose, or guarantees. I think all you can do is make sure you're as fit as you can be. Your fixed costs are very, very competitive, such that at the bottom of the cycle, and we know our business is a cyclical business, so there will be ups, there will be downs. We don't see any negatives on the P&L account. So, in other words, that we are cash positive at the bottom of the cycle, and that means we have to have low fixed costs, we have to have big units, we have to have efficient units, we have to have efficient technology. A lot of that obviously was road tested in 2008, 2009. We've shut one or two things down since 2008, 2009 and sold one or two things. So I think what you see in the INEOS portfolio today is a pretty lean, fit portfolio of assets and plants. So I think we're in good shape.
And finally, how's the team doing?
I had to spoil things. For those of you who are listening, you may know that Tom also is a fan of United. This part of the interview could last longer than the rest of the interview put together once I start. But I mean, we really are flattered by the appalling performance of the rest of the league in England. They're all hopeless. Liverpool, Chelsea, Arsenal, they're hopeless. All the good players seem to have left the UK. So there we are. United is sat at the top of the tree, but we've had to bring Paul Scholes back into midfield. He's 38, and we've had to bring a 38-year-old back into the midfield. And Barcelona, they have got 8 or 9 Paul Scholes, and they're all 24 or 25 years old, So we really are flattered. It's not a surprise to me that we dropped out of the Champions League, and the rest of the English league has dropped out of the Champions League. I don't know what's happened. It's all very depressing. You've completely ruined the interview, Tom.
Thanks.
Yeah, cheers, thanks.